These are the lecture notes for Chapter 1, the study of life. And there we go. Okay, we're going to focus on really the first three sections, the characteristics of living things, a little bit about evolution and adaptations, and then classifying living things into different classification groups. In the process of science, we're going to focus on the steps of the scientific method. So in section 1.1, we're going to focus on the characteristics of living things. And you definitely, if you're going to take this class, need to know the definition of biology is the study of life or the study of living things. So we need to know what living things have in common. What you see on this slide are 5 different types of living things. On the very far left, there's an image that's showing us bacteria, and if I'm not mistaken, those are E. coli bacteria. I know E. coli bacteria are oval shaped or rod shaped, as these are, and this image has been taken with an electron microscope, so those microscopes are able to show us the image, 19,000 times bigger than what it really is. So these bacteria are enlarged for sure. And then in the picture to the right of that, we see a paramecium, which is only 100 times bigger than its actual size. And it's probably that image was taken with a light microscope, like we use in the lab, although this one looks a little bit higher quality than the one we use in the lab. A paramecium and bacteria, what they have in common is that they are both unicellular organisms. They're made of just a single cell, but the bacteria is much smaller than the paramecium. In fact, if there was a bacteria beside the paramecium on this same slide, it would be, the size of it would be like a little dot. Compared to the paramecium. But they're both unicellular or single-celled organisms. And then you can see to the right of the paramecium, you can see a morel, which is a type of fungi, like a mushroom. Morels are edible. And then we have a sunflower, which is a plant, and a whale, which is an animal. So we see that just from these 5 pictures that there's a great deal of diversity in living things. But what this chapter is going to focus on is what living things have in common. So the characteristics that all living things have. One of those characteristics is organization. Living things are organized. You are going to have to know the levels of organization, starting with an atom and going all the way up to the biosphere. We'll go over that in a minute. But living things are also organized based on cells. There are some living things that are only composed of one cell. We call them unicellular. And then some living things that are composed of many cells, like animals and plants. Humans are multicellular. In fact, humans, on average, have trillions, or are composed of trillions of cells. Whereas a bacterium or a protozoan, like we would find in pond water, like the paramecium we saw on the previous slide, those are unicellular organisms. Regardless, the cell is the basic unit of structure and function of all living things. So, living things are organized. That is the first of the emergent properties that we're going to learn. And emergent properties are just going to be, for this chapter, when we talk about emergent properties, these are just the characteristics that living things share. And but basically, the definition of an emergent property is like a property or a characteristic that you can only, the only organisms that have emergent properties are going to be organisms or things that have complexity to them. So as the complexity increases, there will become even newer and more emergent properties. But basically, our emergent properties, when we talk about emergent properties, it's just when we list the characteristics that all living things share. And I'm going to skip to the slide that has all the emergent properties listed. So the emergent properties, or the characteristics of living things, are the levels of organization. Living things require materials and energy. Living things need to maintain homeostasis. They all respond to the environment in some way. They grow and develop. They reproduce and pass their traits on to their offspring, and they have the ability to adapt and evolve as species. So, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and move this slide to, because it really should be somewhere around there. Okay, so now we'll focus on the levels of organization of living things. There we go. All right, so we're going to focus on the levels of organization, and on this slide, which is slide number 7, we're going to start with all living things, just like anything that would classify as matter, even whether it's a living thing or a non-living thing, is composed of atoms. Atoms are the simplest, smallest particles of any type of matter, including living things. This atom that they've given as an example is oxygen. Atoms combine to form molecules. A molecule that contains oxygen would be water. Water has 1 atom of oxygen and 2 atoms of hydrogen. But the example they've shown you is methane. And just so that you know, the atom in the center that's colored black is carbon, and the atoms that surround the carbon atom, the ones that are white, are hydrogen atoms. So they combine to make a molecule, which is combinations of atoms. And then we have molecules combining to form much larger structures like cells. But even before we get to the cell, all of the cell parts, which we typically call those cell organelles, like this nerve cell has a nucleus. We can see the nucleus right there. And this plant cell has a central vacuole. That's one of its organelles. These green structures are chloroplast. This dark colored structure is the nucleus of the plant cell. So these organelles are combinations of molecules, and the molecules combine to form the organelles. And then let me see if I can just write that in this list. Oh, that's way off. Okay, I'm not even going to try that. Let's just don't do that. Let me try it this way. Okay, pointer options. So between molecule and cell, I don't think it's worth the trouble, but yeah, I'm not gonna torture you guys with me trying to write on write with my mouse. I just don't have a stylus. So anyway, but going back to just make sure that you know in the list, in the levels of organization, that it would be atoms, molecules, organelles would come next, and then cells. So cells can be like in animal cells, this is a nerve cell, and in plant cells, this one is a cell that you find within the leaf tissue. When we combine cells together, similar cells together, we get tissues, and this is nervous tissue and leaf tissue. When tissues combine to form a structure that carries out a particular function or a particular job, like the brain is an organ in an animal and the leaf is an organ in a plant, And then organs combine to form an organ system. Elephants, as well as human beings, have 11 different organ systems, including the one shown here is the nervous system. And plants have the organ system of structures that grow above the ground is called the shoot system. And the ones that grow below the ground is called the root system. All right, so now we're looking at the same diagram. We're just adding to it. When you put all the organ systems together, you get the entire organism, even though there are some unicellular organisms and their level of organization stops at the cell. But we have the elephant and the tree. This is an African elephant, and this is an acacia tree. The species would be all the members of that particular organism, that all the members that are the same exact type as that particular organism. And we know they're the same species because they can interbreed. In other words, they can produce offspring, and their offspring can produce offspring. So when you get all the members of the same species that live in the same habitat or the same environment, like all the African elephants that live in the savanna, that's the population of elephants, the population of acacia trees. When you put all the populations of living things within a particular area, when you put them all together, that means all the plants, all the trees, all the grasses, all the animals like the zebras and the elephants and, what else? Lions, and all the fungi and all the bacteria. When you put all the living things together, we call that the community. And then when you take the community and its physical environment within a particular area, we call that an ecosystem. This ecosystem is called the savanna. We have ecosystems called deserts. We have ecosystems called tropical rainforest. And we have the temperate forest. And when you put all the ecosystems on the earth together, you have the biosphere. So technically the biosphere is the area on earth, the zone of air, land, and water where organisms can exist. So the biosphere is just really everywhere that living things can be. We've got some definitions here. We just went through all these terms, but the biosphere we went over. The ecosystem is the community plus the habitat. Community is the collection of all the living things, all the populations that live in the same environment. Population is all the members of the same species within an area. And we know that organisms are the same species if they can interbreed and produce offspring that are fertile. And then go back here and I added, okay, so I tried recording this earlier and I had some problems, but I actually typed this in extra to make sure that you know that in the list of organization, the levels of organization, we'll start with atoms, and it'll go atoms, molecules, organelles, cell, tissue, organ system, organism, species, population, community, ecosystem, biosphere. That would be the list in order from simplest to most complex. Now we're going to move on. That was just one of our emergent properties, one of our characteristics that living things share, was organization. And now we have the second characteristic is that living things acquire or require materials and energy. Energy is defined as the capacity to do work. When we talk about chemical reactions either they need energy, they use up energy, a lot of energy, or they either give off energy. So all of those chemical reactions together, the ones that break down the food that we eat and the ones that build or synthesize molecules that form that our body needs, to live, all of those chemical reactions are called metabolism. And when we talk about energy, the ultimate source of energy for almost all living things is the sun. Now, plants, algae, and some other organisms carry out a process called photosynthesis. they directly absorb sunlight, and then they make their own food in the